Always here, and how you guys treat us like family, because that's what we are. And it's always great to be with you guys. I realize the guys back there have a long trip, so I can sympathize with it. So I'm gonna cut this as short as I can. I just want to make a point or try to make a point and be done. We've heard a lot already this weekend, and I appreciated what everyone said so much. Amen. And it was concerning the singleness, the one who is in us, the one in us who determines the reality of our salvation, the significance of that indwelling presence of that one sufficient, perfect life. Amen. And then the necessity of comprehending that one. Amen. And all I want to do this morning is encourage you in that and edify you in that, and hopefully be somewhat a catalyst for a heart pursuing that reality. I think it's much I found in my own heart and in those that we minister to and that I hear from. It's a lot easier to run and pursue when you know you're pursuing something that's sure. Amen. And real. Yes. Especially when you know you're pursuing an understanding of something that's already apprehended you. Problem is, and I appreciate the heart that Kim just expressed of, I want to know you. I want you, open the eyes of my heart. Let me see you. I want to know you in a true and real way. But the beauty of that desire, and the thing that was always missing in me when I had that desire, and as I have that desire, the thing that seems to be missing in most and always is that firm basis that you can stand on something that's not going to move. Amen. As you pursue the knowing of Him. Right. And that is God's knowing of us. That's the reality that stands sure. We're always catching up. I mean, we've got an eternity of God, an eternity to know and comprehend in this one perfect life. We're always playing catch up as we see. But as we grow, we are growing on something that doesn't grow. Amen. Something that's already full, something already perfect, someone already replete in every spiritual blessing. And in that one, we have in our possession all spiritual blessings. And the beauty of that in Ephesians is, the King James says all spiritual blessings. And of course, we read blessings with an S on it and we think plural. In the Greek, it's not plural at all. The word is singular in the Greek. It means the whole of the divine blessing in Him. Because that's who He is. The one full, complete life that we are called to know. Come and see a man. Come and behold this salvation that I have given. So I'm so thankful for that. I'm thankful for the reality of who He is. So again, I just want to encourage you in that a little with what I'm going to say. I want to turn to Colossians, and I've been in the study a long time in Romans, but now knowing you guys are doing some Roman study too, that's great, so I don't have to go into all of that, but we may go into some of that on our Monday nights. But this has led me to a look in Colossians, and speaking of the simplicity of our salvation, the singleness, yet fullness. And what has happened in my own heart is just a clearer perspective, a clearer view of and a greater appreciation for the significance of the indwelling of Christ. Just what was wrought in me by God through the presence of Jesus Christ. Because religion, unfortunately, will add so many things to him, or attempt to, let's say it that way, because you can't add anything or take away. And see, that's why you know this is real. Because in the midst of my ignorance for so long, in the midst of the ignorance that still yet remains, which is a lot, there is something that is real and unmovable and anchors me, anchors this soul while it is ignorant. As I play catch up, as I see him, I behold something that's already, it's like Paul says, I'm apprehending what has already apprehended me. What a beautiful thing. And so the significance of just him being there, him being present, and why we need to see and know and comprehend, because most people don't understand the significance of his presence. Why it's significant for him to say, I will dwell in the midst of them. Why was that significant? It's because the person who was in them. If you look at the whole encampment of Israel, and we won't get into all that, but the whole encampment of Israel comes to finally, and all of its details and all of the fabrics and the things that it's made of, everything of that encampment, including the banners that was the heading over the whole of the tribes, everything comes in God's design to be consolidated into one single person. The stones take in the whole colors of the banners that are around the tabernacle, the banners of each tribe. Those stones take in every color. And it's all set and fixed, tied. I mean, we were talking about it at lunch the other day, the guys and I. Just to read those words, how in God's design, again, we have to see, God designed it to be this way, because in that design, he took that breastplate and took those garments and the things that represented the people, and he set it in place and fixed it and affixed it to that man. So that when they saw that man, guess what they saw? Their salvation. They saw that they were found in him and that he was their relationship with God. They had no other. As long as he lived, they lived. As long as he was accepted, they were accepted in that one. That was the judgment, the breastplate of judgment. That was the judgment that walked among them and that they beheld, especially on the Day of Atonement when he showed himself, because he showed himself with those garments of beauty and glory to them. However, when he went behind the veil, he shed those garments. And he stood there just clothed with the pure white linen, just himself in his divine righteousness, accepted before God. That one man accepted, that one man determining in God's sight a perfect, unadulterated relationship with the whole of the people, and the whole of the people had nothing to do with it. They determined nothing, but they were indwelt by the one who determined everything. And on the Day of Atonement, they all waited to see. God sees the one clothed in pure white linen. They see the one in whom they are found, in his appearing. And that's the singleness and the significance that I'm seeing in this letter and in the Roman letter, because again, the whole heading of Romans is two men. Everything for the soul of man, everything as far as sin and death and righteousness and life is determined by a man. Our relationship with God, the whole condition of the soul, is dependent upon its relationship to a man. That soul determined nothing. It has no power to determine anything. The soul is always in a passive state, waiting upon the action of another to make something so in it. It can't produce anything. It has no power in this. But in that one, you see all things bestowed fully. And that's what we're going to get into in these lessons. But it took me to 2 Corinthians. We'll turn to Colossians. You don't have to turn to Corinthians. I have it. I'll just read it. 2 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 3, Paul says this to the Corinthians, speaking, of course, of this very salvation, but he says, I fear lest by any means, because there's a lot of means out there for this to happen, a lot of methods, a lot of inventions, a lot of things out there. As the serpent beguiled Eve through his subtlety, so your mind should be corrupted from the simplicity that is in Christ. There's the fear of Paul, not that they would miss anything, but that their minds would be deviated and corrupted, or let's say this, add what is corruptible to that which is incorruptible, to try to bring anything of the corruptible into the incorruptible, perfect spiritual substance. Mix it together. That's the deception that most believers are in. I was in it, and I'm probably still in it. I have to see the Lord to realize how deep in deception I still am. But this deception has to do with a soul being corrupted, a mind being corrupted from that simple reality of one man. The simplicity of Him. There are so many things that can clutter the picture. But guess who never has his picture cluttered? God, the Father, never sees any but that one. And that's why we must have, as Daniel was saying, the faith of God revealed. Paul says it this way in Romans 3. What if they do not believe? Speaking of the Jew and, of course, the Gentile. What if they don't believe? What if they never come to believe this or understand or receive this? Does it invalidate the faith of God? God forbid. Let it not be so. Let God be what? True. The truth. Let the truth be of God and every man a liar. That's how real this is. The faith that we must come to is His faith made known, His understanding being revealed, His view, His perspective being wrought in our hearts by that divine miracle called the revelation of Christ, so that we would see the singularity of our salvation. And try and never be deceived to attempt to find anything of reality elsewhere. Just Him. The word singleness here, simplicity, it means one, it means single. But the word means pure, to be understood as unmixed with any other matter, any other thing. That's what we've come to. When you read like, of God are you in Christ Jesus, who is made unto us, think of that. Unmixed. Why? Because it doesn't need to be mixed with anything. You don't need supplements. We don't need supplementation to this single substantiation, this single fullness, because we're going to see how beautiful this word single actually is. It's not just one, it is that, but there's beautiful meaning to the word. But let's go back for just a second and see another part of this where he says corrupted from the simplicity that is in Christ, because he prefaces that verse by truly defining what he's talking about. Because the thing that's been on my heart, the emphasis I want to make this morning, is concerning the significance of the headship of Christ. to his body and all members of that body, his headship. Because our salvation is a matter, again, of the headship of a man. Death, corruption, sin, that was a result of the headship of a man. Theologians call it the federal head of humanity, right? Well, righteousness and holiness and all the things that are found in him that are his very person, for that to be a reality in us, it is determined by the headship of a man. The significance of headship has been on my heart, and I want to just try, at least for a moment, to convey it. Because here's what he says in 2 Corinthians 11, verse 2, right before what we just read. For I am jealous over you with a godly jealousy. Not I'm jealous over you that you go after another minister, right? No. That you go to another church and not mine. No. That's the jealousy of most preachers. His jealousy was a godly jealousy because I have espoused you to one husband. And in so doing, this word it says in the King James that I may present, but that is actually in the past tense in the Greek. Meaning, since this union with this husband has happened, you are now standing in this reality a chaste virgin to Christ. And then he gives, I fear lest you should be corrupted from this simplicity. What is the simplicity? What is this singleness? One husband. And most preachers today, and I'm not trying to be crass when I say this, most preachers, most ministries, most gospels that are floating out there today are attempting to cause those who have been joined to one husband to commit adultery on that one by adding to him, by finding lovers, finding things that will add to. And you can't add to a perfect man. This is what Paul's fear was. I have espoused you. My gospel was the catalyst that brought you to, introduced you to your husband. I have married you to this, espoused you to this one man, and I desire for you to not be turned, but have your gaze set, fixed, singularly upon the sufficiency of that one husband and find in him everything that he is. That's the beauty of this statement. And then, if you even look a little further, because, then you see the significance of what Paul says. Of course, he's talking about reality, but because he'll say, I'm speaking of Christ and his church when he says, the wife has one head, and let her be subject to the head of her head. Why? Because he's speaking of this very thing. It is about a subjection to the headship of a man who makes fruit not a possibility from us, but makes fruit the actual reality that has been produced because he's the husband. He's the performing of it. That's why Paul espoused them to that man, because he realized the other man. Go to Romans 7 and look at that first husband. What did he do? Fruit unto death? Right? The bondage to sin kept you internally enslaved to death and darkness and sin. What had to happen? He had to die. He, the husband, that's what Romans 7 says. But when he dies, you are free, liberated, set free from that man, so that what? You may be married to another.
Hallelujah. Thank you, Lord. Amen.
Romans 6 says that very thing before he begins to give it a face and an example. And it says, once you were bound to sin, and in being bound to sin, you were what? Free from righteousness. But now, becoming the slaves of righteousness, you are free from sin. Do you see what Christianity has done is saying those two things still hold together, and you have to struggle to see which one wins out. There's no two things here. I've married you to one husband. You don't still have the one in the bedroom in there, and you have this one in the living room, and you try to figure out which man you're going to date tonight. Right? That's how it's preached. I mean, maybe my mind works a little different than yours, but that's how I see it. It's not that. It is, therefore you are dead to that man. And you are dead to everything that that man, because of his headship, determined for you. It's always about the soul enslaved or in subjection to someone. And it's either that someone it's subjected to either makes reality impossible, makes spiritual reality an impossibility, or it brings in absolute fullness everything of that reality. That's what we're dealing with. And if we're born of God, if we are born of the Spirit, thus married to this perfect man, the new man, the man of spirit, that's what has happened. God, in His mercy and grace and by the exertion of His own power, as Jimmy was saying, has imposed upon a soul that could not do it, could not make it happen, a condition called full salvation, perfect life, salvation without sin. That's a clean cut. That's something determined not by me. It's important to understand some of these things, that when you look at the Greek language and you see these things as far as what God has done and what we possess and what has come, it's always seemingly in the passive tense. You know, you have an active tense where you go out and do it, and then you have a passive tense where another has to do what you can't. Or you have to have a power exerted from outside of yourself to make something happen. That's the passive. You're always in a passive condition because you can't get it done. And that's the whole reality here. Even to be carried on by the Spirit, where Hebrews 6 says, let us go on unto that which is perfect. We think, yeah, how do we do it? But in the Greek, it's passive. Because the literal translation says, let us be being carried on by Him into this realm of perfect life. Don't try to lay again these fragments and pieces, the elementary things. No, reality has come. Now allow Him who knows that reality, because we don't and we can't, let Him bring you where you can't go. See the ark and go after the ark. But you have to see. He has to carry you where you can't go. It's Ezekiel, where the man with the rod in his hand that measures the place, the man that had that line and the rod, and Ezekiel says it beautifully. Everything he beheld, every reality of that city and the temple, he says, He brought me and He measured it. He brought me, He measured it. That's what we're talking about when we speak of knowing, growing in this grace, comprehending what has comprehended us. We're speaking of a full work, a finished work, a glorified work, glory in this temple, but He has to bring us, and He has to show us Himself as the measure of the thing He's brought us to. That's the reality of this. And that's all bound up with this headship. It's all bound up with this one husband. Because again, singleness doesn't just mean one. It means one, but it's beautiful in that it also means copious, bountiful, liberal. Does that sound like one? It's confusing, isn't it, when you think of it with an English thought or just a natural mind, and you think one, okay, that's one, that's singular. But that same word in the Greek means copious bestowal and bountifulness. We're about to read that in Colossians, right? In Him dwells all the fullness of God, and you are complete in Him. Not complete because He's given you a bunch of stuff. Not complete because you finally achieved this level. You are complete because He's there.
Amen. Amen.
This is Christ in you, the glory that was always hoped for. The very hope God set in the midst of a creation when He subjected that creation to its own vanity under the law. He subjected it to its own emptiness, to its own weakness, so that those under such subjection would cry out for the end of that subjection to be brought to the true liberty of the sons of God. And how is that found? In Him. And we're still waiting on it to come in the future. I mean, we read Romans 8 and the hope being fulfilled and the liberty of the sons of God and the manifestations of the sons of God, and we think, man, won't that be great? Yes, it is. It sure is. It's presently great because He makes it great. He is the reality of that. He's the liberty of all the sons of God that we've come to. What is that liberty? Paul expresses it before he says these things in the same chapter. It is, by the law of the Spirit of life, I am made free from the law of sin and death. That's the liberty of the sons of God. That was the liberty expected when God subjected creation under the law, so that His expectation could be realized in a man. Not in men, but in a man. And those who are found in that man and are born under the headship and subjection of that man, the dominion of one king, they're free.
Amen.
Indeed. Remember what it says about, and before this, we got into other things about peace and the peace of God, and I think we talked about that a little bit Monday about peace, and Ephesians 2, how He of twain made of one, made one new man, of twain made one new man. Put away the whole, that first man, put away that, raised up a perfect man, a new man, in whom there is neither Jew or Gentile. The beauty of it was it talks about Him removing the law, the commandments that were contrary. Colossians says it that way. But Ephesians says that it was the middle wall of partition that separated Jew and Gentile, made them enemies with one another, and it demonstrated the enmity between God and man. But it was surface. It was superficial at best. It didn't make and really bring about a different distinction, because what He did simultaneously in the cross is He removed that commandment, took it out of the way, and showed Jew and Gentile not different at all. He removed the thing that could have been seen as a distinction and had been for thousands of years seen as a distinction. He removed that thing and showed the same source is Jew and Gentile share the same source. They have the same seed and they have the same headship, and that head has to be cut off. Just like Goliath, David has to cut his head off. And he does. There's a difference now that we've been brought under another headship. Now, what is the need? Hold to that head. Hold the head. Grasp upon Him with everything you have, because even God has to do that. You set your heart to find in that head the full measure and the full supply of all spiritual things. And you don't seek for it anywhere else. If you're looking at Him and you don't see something, just keep looking.
Amen.
Don't look elsewhere. Don't deviate your heart. That's what Paul would say, and I'm just trying to hurry up, guys. I'm sorry. Paul would say it this way, that he speaks of those who are to try by the law to find righteousness. And he says, you've fallen from grace. Right? But he says, but we who are spiritual, we wait. We wait on the hope of righteousness by faith. See, while these are trying to achieve it by law, we wait to see him as it by faith. We wait to see him as the hoped for righteousness that's already present. Why? Because the reality we've come to, again, heading through Galatians with that, the whole reality Paul understood that every believer has come to is not I, but Christ. You don't arrive at that later in the game. You start there. Because that is the declaration of the headship of one man. Not I, but Christ. That's reality. And again, I just want to encourage you in the reality, because the singleness of this is also the fullness of it. Because in him the whole thing consists. It is held together in one harmonious, beautiful reality in this one perfect man. So what is the need? See him. Not seeing him so you can gain something more, but seeing him that you may see him as the much more you gained when he came to dwell in you. This is what we're going to read. Let's read a few things here. This marriage to this one man is truly the holy matrimony that the whole thing was about. Let no man put asunder what God has joined together. Now we can read, you could say that in a regular marriage, but I'm telling you that's not the marriage he's talking about. This one is. Subjected to your husband, the headship of a husband.
Amen.
Let no man. Why? Because no man can. Not even you. Not even me. You can't do that. This is the love of God from which nothing can separate us, not even us. Man, that's good. I'm telling you, man, this has taken all of this from me. I was a scared, nervous little rat a long time because I was worried that I could mess this up. You can't mess this up. Because it wasn't dependent on you to get done, and it's not dependent on you to continue. It is him and him alone. I mean, we were talking yesterday, the guys and I were at Subway just sitting and talking, and the beauty of this came into my heart. I was reading some things in another segment of this study. But I'm thinking, how significant are we in this picture? And the beauty of that just dawned in my heart when you read Paul saying in Romans 10, it said, I shall be found of those who've not even sought after me. And he says to those who by law tried to seek him with all their heart, with all their zeal, he says to them, I've stretched my arms out to you forever. But you wouldn't come. How significant are we in this picture? When those who tried to seek him, he still had to reach out for them. And those who didn't even seek him, he reached out and was found of them. How big of a role you play? This is the question. How big of a role? Because this is the whole thing in Colossians. The inventions of men to try to give Christian the assumption of duty, responsibility, and achievement. And we go after it. Because we go after the plausibility of their argument, saying, if you just do this, you'll get there. Peter speaks of these Judaizers who's coming in, just like here in Colossians and in Galatians, and they come to them and they give them all these inventive ways and methods. At least at this time they were still referring back to the legitimate things of the law, but those things were no longer valid. Now we just have a joke, what things they point to. But Peter says this, while they promise you liberty, they themselves are what? Slaves of corruption. What is the corruption? They're still joined to the headship of another man. and they're trying to bear the fruit that is only possible through the headship of another man. This is not about the changing of actions or the doing better of actions. The whole thing was brought about through the headship of another man. His desire here is for them to recognize the truth of headship so that they could hold that head and find the full supply in Him, as Him. Now, let's just read a couple things. I want to go through all 3 chapters of Colossians. I don't have time. Let's just start here. Verse 12, Colossians 1, giving thanks unto the Father which has made us meet, or has qualified, that word is qualified, or made sufficient, made fit, to be partakers of the inheritance of the saints in light. And that's going to be important, this made worthy, qualified, because of what he's going to say in the 2nd chapter about let no man judge you. Let no man judge you. That's because they go hand in hand. But he's showing them here, you have already been qualified in this. How have you been qualified? Well, he's going to go on and say it. To be partakers of this inheritance of the saints in light, who hath delivered us from the power of darkness. Again, look at these 2 men, 2 kings, 2 kingdoms. From the power of darkness through translating us into the kingdom of His dear Son, the beloved Son, the Son of His love. Jameson, Fawcett, and Brown says the Son upon whom His love is settled. The problem is, and the whole thing of deception and corruption from the simplicity of Christ, is that we, because of the lust of our own flesh, want to be loved too. We want to be loved by God too. We want to have what He had before His Father. And guess what? You do. Why? Because He's in you. Amen. This has everything to do with the inheritance. The inheritance in the saints is about Him dwelling in us, the heir being the seed in us. To Him all things are promised. He is the yea and the amen of the whole thing. How do we partake of that? He's there. How can you get God? How can you deepen your relationship with God? You can't. We've had meetings, revivals, seminars for thousands, hundreds of years. How do you deepen your relationship with God? The question is, how do you know the depths of the relationship that God has given? That's the question. It's not about you deepening your relationship. It's realizing you don't have a relationship except Him. That's right. And then you cry out to God, I know I didn't make this happen. I realize I wasn't an instrumental part of this even being brought about. Show me. Show me what you've done. Let me see your grace. Let me grow in this grace, this full, copious bestowal of your fullness that I had no part of. In making it work or making it happen, God, show me who this man is. Let me see him. But I'm telling you, he is who he is. He is complete. He is full. And he is our life even before you see him. And that's why you are called to see him. You're not called to get prepared for the seeing or to qualify for the seeing. He has qualified you to be a partaker already because he's there. Because we had no part of this inheritance in the light. We had no part of that until the true heir came and made his residence in the soul. In whom we have redemption, even the forgiveness of sins, who is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of every creature. For by him, listen to him exalting this man. For by him were all things created that are in heaven and that are on earth, visible and invisible, whether they be thrones, dominions, principalities, and powers. All things were created by him and for him. And he is before all things, and by him all things consist, held together. And see, we read that and we're thinking like him holding this, and anything happens, it could just, at any moment, just fly out of his hands and the whole universe would be just doing this. I've heard that preached. Some translations actually talk about the natural universe being held by this man. No, it's saying that the natural universe was a picture and a testimony, created things, whatever, of this one who in himself holds it all together in the oneness of himself. The actual word means to be made to consist as one in one harmonious system. We're not just talking about the universe and the Milky Way. We're talking about all things of God here. Because it is in him, who is the head of the body. Verse 18. The church, who is the head of the body, the church. There's the headship being presented. The beginning, the firstborn from the dead, that in all things he would have preeminence. For it pleased the Father that in him should all fullness dwell. He didn't give it to you and me. That means you can't lose it because it's not your possession. It's his possession, and he makes it real, and he holds the whole thing together. You know how righteousness stays pure, untainted, not mixed with anything? Because my hand can't touch it. And we think it not only can touch it, but we can mess it up. Not going to happen. It doesn't happen. It's him. It's who he's. See, and again, the significance of this, you can't convey it with words. I'm standing up here just like this. But Paul is using every word, every way that he can possibly do to present in a picture the greatness of this head and the significance of the headship of this man, that the whole of the thing, the stuff that these Judaizers are going to come to you and say, you got to be circumcised to get this. You got to have feast days to get this part of it, or you don't have it. And he's saying, no, in this head, the whole thing consists as one harmonious reality because God gave it to him. God, it was the pleasure of God that in that man the whole thing would consist. That's who our head is. That in him should all fullness dwell, and having made peace through the blood of his cross. Go to Ephesians 2, what we've talked about already in the study I'm on. By him to reconcile all things unto himself. By him I say, whether they be things in earth or things in heaven. And you were sometimes alienated, enemies in your mind by the wicked works, and now hath he reconciled in the body of his flesh through death, to present you holy, unblameable, and unreproved in his sight. Where do we see a picture of that? The high priest. He presented the whole of Israel holy, unblemished, perfect in the sight of God. How did he do that? Did he bring every individual one, wash them up real good, and say, now make the best impression you can? He stood there as the only good impression there is. He stood there as one holy unto God, accepted only by the Father. There's their holy, unreproved, unblemished. That's what it means, qualified us to be partakers, because he's the qualification. Paul would say it in Romans 8. Guys, you are not in the flesh, you are in the Spirit. Well, what makes that so? The Spirit dwells in you. That's easy. What now? The Spirit dwells in you. Yeah, but what has to happen to make that so? The Spirit dwells in you. There's the significance of this. He did it because He is it. He's the full separation from the thing. He is Aaron running between those who are dying and those who are living. He stands as the dividing line between the living and the dead and stops the plague. This is the significance of our union with the head, of the headship of that one man, because you see it perfectly in this woman with the issue of blood, right? We've been talking about the internal corruption of man, whether Jew or Gentile, the deficiency of man, the depravity of man, just by birth, just because of the seed that's in him. And we see that picture with this woman. Here she has an issue of blood that can't be fixed, can't be cured. There's an internal condition that makes her unclean by the law. She's not supposed to be out in public. She has to sneak around, go around the back of the place so she can finally touch Jesus. She has to sneak because she's unclean in the sight of the law. Well, guess what? So are we. Born of man, born of the seed of man. And this woman knows in her heart that the only thing she can do, because no man can cure it, no doctor, no physician, it's incurable. Can't fix it. What's the need? I've got to touch Him. And she touched Him. And it says immediately she was cured. She was healed immediately. And the word actually in the Greek means she was saved immediately. Why? Because she touched Him. And this isn't just a passing touch. This is affixed. The word in the Greek actually means affixed herself to Him and said, I will not let you go. Now we know in the picture she did, but in her heart she affixed herself to that man and joined herself to him. And in that joining, immediately cured. That's what we see here. And men will point you out and look at you and look at the defects they see in you because you see them too. And they'll look at that and they'll say, here's how you fix it. Here's how you make it work. But guess what? Reality is never defined externally, and man can't see reality. Reality is defined internally by God Himself. The reality of your righteousness is not what you do or don't do. Reality of your righteousness is who He is. The headship of Christ has brought that to be. Because look at what He says. I'm going to stop. I'm out of time. Because this all comes to the person, Christ in you. It'll take us a long time to go through this. And then he speaks of let no man spoil you through their philosophies, vain deceits that are according to the traditions of men, because those deceits, those things are always a methodology and a means to fix something that isn't broke. It's a desire to fix something, not because it's broken, but because you're trying to see the perfection of something where it will never be seen. And that's in your flesh. That's in mine. That's here, right here. So what do? They quell it by saying, touch not, taste not, handle not, don't do, don't say, don't think. And Jesus even shows that's an impossibility in Matthew 5, right? Oh, we do the law, man. We do it perfectly. And you say, you think so? I came as the fulfillment of the law. And here's the point of the law in total. It's not you shall not commit adultery. You've heard that said, and you try to do it, and some of you do it perfectly. Don't do this. Don't commit adultery. I'm saying if you even think, if the thought of it even arises in you, it's already done in your heart, because that's where it's real. In you. God looks at the heart. Why? That's where reality is. Whether it's death or life, reality is in the heart. So we're not talking about men not doing specific deeds. We're talking about a man in whose heart the very thought of it can arise. Now try that. That's why by the law no man is justified. But that one man comes as the justification of the men, because of a subjection they were previously under, could never fulfill. That's that law that Paul talks about in his members. That keeps evil present even when he tries to do the opposite. And we're talking about a man doing what the law said, not going out and doing bad stuff. No. So, for in this man, don't be deceived by their deceits. For in him dwells the fullness of the Godhead bodily, and you are complete in him who is the head of all principality and power. And then he begins to speak, in whom you're circumcised, in whom you have received the true baptism, the circumcision made without hands. You have put off an entire what? Body of sin. That's a man. That's him. You've put off that whole thing. Now, realize you have something altogether new. Another man is your head. Another seed is in you. Don't be deceived by judges who try to judge you. What did he say? Unworthy. So this is what the literal would say, is unworthy of receiving the prize, unworthy of receiving the reward. And you realize he's not saying that's going to cause you from finishing the race or the race ever being finished. That's not what he says. We're talking about a judge who gives out their prize after the race is over. Isn't that interesting? Yeah, it's over all right. The problem is not that the race has not been won. And I know the verses that come into our mind, run the race with patience and all this. No, we're talking about something totally different here. A man who has wrought a victory. A man who has won the race. Even when Paul talks about bringing his body in subjection and running, he says, run as the one who has won the race. Read it in a literal translation. That's what it says. Run as the one who has won the race. Why? Because we are found in the one who wins it. Only one wins. Isn't that what it says? Many run for the prize, but only one wins. So where are we? We've got to be found in the one. And the question is not the race being won, because that's a done deal. In him you're complete. All the things he says here, Christ in you, the glory hoped for. That's a one race. That's a finished work. The question is men judging you, pointing out your unworthiness and saying you can't receive the prize. You haven't done enough yet. So what do? We try to do enough. We run back on the track and try to refinish the race. It's kind of what Paul said. Can you further perfect what is already perfect? Galatians. Fools of Galatia, how can you further perfect this? It's already perfect. And then he goes into Abraham's faith that knew that God would impute something that he couldn't produce. Now, let's get down to the last part here that I'll focus on. Let no man judge you unworthy of the prize in meats, drinks. Here's things that they were pointing out. Holy days, new moons, Sabbath days, offerings, tithes, church services, all of the stuff, right? Prayer, fasting, Bible study. Don't let men judge you in these things. They're not bad things until they become the determining factor of your relationship with God. Until they're the measuring stick by which you measure everything of spiritual life. That's when they're bad. Which are a shadow of the things to come. But the body, the substance that casts that shadow, is Christ. He's in you. So let no man beguile you of what? Your prize, your reward, through their voluntary humility. These are things they'll tell you to do, things they do, practices they have. They try to be humble, and they're so arrogant in their humility. Some of the most arrogant people are some of the humblest people I've ever met. Because they're humble and arrogant because of it. Look how humble God made me. Okay. Let no man beguile you of your reward, humility, worshiping of angels, intruding into things that they have seen. The word not's in the King James. But they see these things and they intrude into them like they're the fulfillment of them. They walk into a place that doesn't belong to them. And he's puffed up with the fleshly mind. And what's the issue? He's not holding the head. I'm going to read this this is the Arthur S. Way translation. Let no one cheat you out of the heavenly prize through fancy self-abasements and adoration of angels. Such an inventor, that's what he calls him, an inventor. He's invented a bunch of stuff. Dwells amidst the visions of his own mind, and he is inflated quite groundlessly by an intellect that can only grasp material things. And he does not grasp the principle of the one head, from whom the whole body is furnished with nourishment and knit together by joints and ligatures, and is ever growing with the growth that God Himself fosters. That's what we're talking about. The word here, furnished, and the nourishments. I want to read that and then we'll be done. The head, from which it means a source out from which something is done. The ministering to you the full abundance. Here's the word nourishment, minister. It means a full supply that has been fully furnished. To supply abundantly and fully. Remember what we said about the singleness of Christ? That in that one there's copious bestowal and fullness. This is what he's saying. The holding of the head, seizing upon that one head because you have found the man. Where your soul is nourished with the full supply that it was intended for when it was created, as Jimmy said earlier this week. That's what the whole thing is. Why? Because he'll go on and say, these things that they offer you, these things that they point out to you to do, they're not helpful. They're not going to do anything. He says they have no value at all to check or to stop sensual self-indulgence. And actually, they feed self-indulgence. They feed lusts. What does it? The headship of one man. The rest of it feeds into the desire, the lust of the flesh. The other leaves no room to glory except in Him. That's the reality of headship. And that's why he'll go on and say, so seeing that you are in this man, seeing that you're risen with this perfect man, seeing that this is reality and you have come to it, now what you need to do is not get involved in these things you're dead to, touch not, taste not, handle not. You need to set your affection on that above reality. And that's why we try to implement all these other external things, because the nature of reality is hidden. It's spirit. It is spirit and truth, because if it's spirit, if it's Him, it is truth. Once it comes into the earth and we apply it and work with it and play with it like we do, it's no longer truth. Truth is found here, nowhere else. I am from above. Set your heart there, because what's going to happen if you set your heart to see Him? He's going to appear. That's a promise. He's going to appear. There's no doubt about it. He's going to appear, and when He who is our life appears, then we're going to see reality as it has been from the beginning. From the moment He came and dwelt, from the moment His headship came upon the soul, He became the life and all the full bestowal of that life. And you will see that in His face. You will see that you have dwelt in this glory from the start. You have dwelt in a relationship you tried to achieve, and He just gave it to you as a gift. You remember Korah's rebellion? Korah's rebellion is a significant picture of this. These 250 men standing there and accusing Moses and Aaron of thinking themselves higher than they ought to. God had set them in the midst of these people to provide a relationship with Himself that those people couldn't have otherwise. God had set a singular relationship in their midst, and they were rejecting that one because they wanted one too. And so Moses hears this. He said, God brought you near. Do you want to be priests also? Do you want the priesthood too, meaning the high priesthood? He said, I tell you what you do. Get your censers, bring them tomorrow, and the Lord's going to know. That's what the word, it says show in the King James, but the Lord will know the one who is his. And you will see, and the man whom he has chosen or upon whose face he has fixed his gaze, he will show him. He will remain. So we know what happened. They do that. The impressive sight of 250 men waving their, thinking something good's going to happen, of course. And so the land opens up, swallows them up. They're no longer there. One man remains. One relationship that God had always knew them by remains. And this is the thing he's fighting against. Because what they were calling relationship, God called rebellion. And the problem is what most people desire for relationship is actually rebellion to the headship of one man. So, the whole desire here, all comes down to this, right? Let us know the man. Let us see the head, the face that defines the whole, and in whom all things are given. All right, guys, I'm done. Thanks for this weekend.